Shana Tova. Let's try that together. Just a collective, big, huge, deep breath. Because as I say Shana Tova, I know the weight of those words. Because at this point, so many of us are holding so much grief and pain and even existential dread. And then we sit here tonight and wish each other a Shana Tova Umetuka, a good and sweet new year. And a year ago, I talked about the way that wishing one another a Shana Tova can feel like such an impossible greeting, especially when New Year's and new jobs, new relationships can often just feel so overwhelming. Well, this year I'd like to reframe this greeting as a blessing that we offer one another from the deepest place in our kishkas. May the year ahead, please, God, be a good and sweet year. I know that we sit here together on the 1st of Tishrei and on the 2nd of October. We are on the precipice of the year anniversary of a heartbreaking war that has only continued to magnify in these past few days. The election in our country is less than 5 weeks away, and the list actually can and does go on and on and on. But right now, we deserve to pause because we're here. And I don't mean physically in this room or joining our community virtually tonight. I mean, we're here in this liminal moment, both the early stages of this new year, but still figuring out how to turn the page on the year that technically only ended an hour ago. So before I say it one more time, maybe take the hand of a loved one or make eye contact with a fellow member of our community, maybe with a gentle smile, and take as many deep breaths as you need over the course of this holiday. Shana Tova. Okay, so how do we do it? How do we turn the page on a year that only seemed to grow more painful and more challenging with each passing month? What will it actually take to begin to look forward and to set intentions to make meaningful changes in ourselves, in our communities, in our world in 5785? So one of the beautiful parts of our tradition is the way that the sages of blessed memory, they almost had a clairvoyance about the way that certain feelings and certain spiritual needs would maintain a timelessness. Their choices, their very intentional choices for our Torah and our Haftorah readings over this holiday, the tefillot, the prayers that we'll say, they've managed to not only remain resonant, but are often the exact words of wisdom or comfort we need as we gather on these Yamim Noraim, on these high holidays. So on the second morning of Rosh Hashanah, Jewish communities around the world are going to read from chapter 31 of the book of Jeremiah. And this reading is part of a larger collection of what are called these consolation oracles. And this one in particular is meant to be a prophecy that comforts the people as they are seeking redemption in the eyes of the divine. And so after several verses in which Jeremiah describes the ways in which God will redeem the people and return them to their homelands, we read this sort of stunning verse. A cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping. Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. So to provide just a little bit of context, Rachel here is our foremother. She was married to Jacob, and gave birth to her children Joseph and Benjamin. And Rachel tragically dies shortly after giving birth to Benjamin, who actually she initially names Ben-Oni, meaning a child born from my suffering. So why is it that Jeremiah is declaring that the people will finally be redeemed, and then he's making mention of our foremother Rachel, someone who lived hundreds of years before this oracle is being delivered? So a dear friend of mine and teacher, Rabbi Maya Zinko, explains that when the rabbis were expounding upon this verse in a text called Eicha Rabbah, they teach us that Moses himself returned to this world and came to God, begging for the redemption of our destroyed and dispersed people. And then Jacob, and then Isaac, and then Abraham, they each took a turn as they leapt up from their graves and pleaded their case. But it wasn't until Rachel Imenu, our mother, wept bitterly. Not until then was the mercy of the Holy Blessed One aroused. So in this midrash, a midrash is what I like to describe as the rabbi's version of fan fiction. It's the use of storytelling here that helps us draw out a really important piece of theology. The rabbis imagine that the people to whom Jeremiah is prophesying are feeling something that we might currently be all too familiar with. They're in this moment of desperation, of devastation. They're longing for a better tomorrow. And so what happens in this rabbinic imagination? Moses Rabbeinu, our greatest prophet and teacher, Avraham Avinu, the very first Jew of our tradition, Isaac, the soft and gentle and often misunderstood Isaac, and Jacob, the father of the 12 sons who give way to the 12 tribes of Israel, they collectively rise from their graves and they proceed to beg and to plead with God. Please, redeem our people. Remember the covenant you made with each of us. And despite their negotiating and their bargaining, God is still unmoved. And then God hears these tears, the tears of our mother Rachel, a mother who is still crying with a broken heart for the children she didn't get to see grow old, for the people that are her great-great-great-grandchildren who deserve something better than the life that she lived. And it is as she wails and as she weeps that God is finally swayed. God hears and understands the rawness and the depths of her tears, and thus finally brings her and the people comfort and redemption. So over the past few weeks, I've not been able to stop thinking about Rachel's tears. And this is because as I've continued to witness and myself feel the anguish of the families of the thousands of precious souls who we have lost over the last year. It's another mother, another Rachel, whose tears have given expression to grief and prayer that I have found simultaneously moving and inspiring and heartbreaking. Last December, months before she lost her dear son, Hirsch, Rachel Goldberg Poland shared this poem, One Tiny Seed, that was written for and dedicated to a woman in Gaza. I have cried 1,000,000 tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know that way over there, there's another woman who looks just like me, because we are all so very similar. And she has also been crying. All those tears, a sea of tears. They all taste the same. There is a lullaby that says, your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man. Can we take them, gather them up, remove the salts, and pour them over our desert of despair, and plant one tiny seed a seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, war, and hope. And see what grows. I know that for so many of us, our hearts have not stopped aching for Rachel, for the hostages and their families, for the loved ones of the thousands upon thousands who have died in Israel and in Gaza over the past year. My heart has been broken as I hear stories from those of you who have lost loved ones, who are experiencing painful fissures with families and friends, whose grief has reached points that just feel too overwhelming. And while our holiday of Rosh Hashanah is most often associated with the joy and sweetness of new beginnings, the rabbis understood that this day had to be a container for so much more. In the section of our Talmud dedicated to Rosh Hashanah, we find a discussion amongst these rabbis in which they're trying to make meaning of the different soundings of the shofar. We have the singular tkiyah, the triplet shvarim, and the staccato 9 blasts of the truah. And so we most often think of these blasts as a wake-up call or as a call to action for the ways that we must change in the year ahead. But in this particular text, the rabbis end up in a discussion about Sisera. And Sisera is a Canaanite commander who ends up being seduced and killed by an Israelite woman named Yael. And when Sisera dies, we read that his mother heard the news of losing her son, and she cried out this great cry. She wailed. So one of our sages teach us that the wails of Sisera's mother were moanings, and these moanings were akin to the broken sighs, as in the 3 blasts of the shvarim. However, another one of our sages taught that, in fact, they were whimpers, as in the short 9 blasts called the truot. In either case, the rabbis are attributing the awakening that we hope to arouse in our communities through the blasting of the shofar to the mother of Sisera. Not only a minor character in the Tanakh, but one associated with an enemy of the Israelites. The rabbis are deeply moved by the tears of a parent whose sobs are raw and involuntary. This deeply human feeling pierces through their expected biases, and her cries of Sisera's mother, they're lifted up as one of the holiest and most important forms of prayer, a prayer that is truly capable of stirring the divine. As we enter a new year, as we seek to turn the page on the tragedies of 5784, we see this liminal moment of Rosh Hashanah as a time for us to cry out to God, to cry out to one another, to pour our hearts out, not necessarily with our words or with our tefillot, but with our tears, our wails, our moans, our whimpers, our cries, our most deeply felt emotions, however they're manifesting in us. And if we can't find the emotions themselves, the shofar can be the vessel that holds our pain. And what we see forming here is a theology that outright rejects the Aristotelian notion of God as the unmoved mover. Instead, we see this vision of a divine presence that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel describes as the most moved mover. Heschel explains that our God is not aloof, but involved, not distant, but near, not immune from, but vulnerable to what happens in this world and what the divine's creatures do. What all this means is that God is filled with feeling, filled with pathos. And I don't know, maybe this isn't enough. Maybe this year has left you too angry with God or doubting how a divine presence could allow such suffering, so much heartbreak, so much anxiety about what comes next. Maybe you've never been sure that such a divine being even exists, and these past 12 months have only calcified that reality. And if the sages of the Talmud aren't your cup of tea, or if Heschel isn't your rabbi, I'll share with you some wisdom from one more incredible rabbi, one more incredible teacher, Brené Brown. She teaches us that if we're going to find our way back to each other, we have to understand and know empathy. If we're going to find our way back to each other, vulnerability is going to be that path. So our tears, whether they are literal tears or just the most authentic expressions of our pain and our vulnerability, they have incredible power. They have the power to bring down the temperature in a painful conflict with a loved one. They can allow us to create deeper connections with colleagues or with friends. They might even move God to feel our pain, to be invested in our well-being, to redeem us in the year to come. And over these next 10 days, we pray with our words, with our singing, with our chanting that will be inscribed in the book of life, that will be here for another trip around the sun. Perhaps this year, or maybe just over Rosh Hashanah, we can take a slightly different approach to this endeavor. Rabbi Elazar taught that after the destruction of the temple, the gates of prayer were locked, and prayer was no longer accepted as it once was. Yet, despite the fact that the gates of prayer were locked with the destruction of the temple, the gates of tears were not locked, and one who cries before God may rest assured that their prayers will be answered. So when I wish you a Shana Tova tonight, I mean it. I just understand that we might not feel it just yet. We might need tonight and tomorrow and maybe the next several days or weeks to continue to cry out so that the gates of tears overflow with our prayers for a better tomorrow, so that the hardened hearts of those that feel like our enemies can again become softened, so that the compassion we so desperately need for ourselves can have the space to take refuge. In one of my favorite Rosh Hashanah prayers, we repeat this refrain, Tichle Shana Vekileloteha. May the year and its curses end. May this new year and its blessings begin. Please, God, most moved mover, remember the tears of our mother Rachel. Please be moved by the tears of Rachel Goldberg-Polin and by the thousands of other parents who over the past year lost beloved children all too soon. Please, God, be awakened by the wails of Sisera's mother as we blow the shofar, and have compassion for those of us that, just like her, are still groaning, and those of us that continue to whimper. Please, God, when we cry out to you with prayers for a good and sweet new year, let our tears plant a tiny seed, that on this Rosh Hashanah, our year and its curses will end, and this new year and its abundant blessings will finally begin. Shana Tova.